Hi, this is Mike Kaufman, and you're listening to my hero, Scott Grant, on the Scott Grant Radio Show on 103.9 FM, WSOS, StAugustine.radio.com.
Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to the Scott Grant Show on 103.9 FM, WSOS. I'm here today with my guest host, Jennifer Price.
Hi, I'm really excited to learn a lot about journalism today.
And our main guest, Tom Giusto of ABC News.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I spent 38 years at ABC News. I'm retired, but still working. Just back from covering the primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Well, I'm sure that's exciting, but let's talk about your past, because you had indicated to me that you kind of started out in the business working in some radio.
I actually started out working at a radio station in my high school. My high school in New York City, which was Brooklyn Tech High School, had a radio station owned by the New York City Board of Education. So I started working in radio at 13 years old.
Well, that's young. Were there no child labor laws at that point? Or I guess since
They
it was high
didn't pay
school.
us, so.
Yeah, I guess it was high school. But then you said you had worked with Murray the K,
Yes,
Don Imus, and you mentioned
Wolfman Jack.
Oh, Wolfman Jack. I remember all those guys.
I was so fortunate. I was in college, and one of my friends helped get me a job at WNBC Radio in New York. It's an NBC station. I worked at 30 Rock when I was 19 years old, and it was fabulous. I didn't know how good I had it. I had the lowest job there was. I wrote traffic and weather reports. I would listen to other radio stations' helicopters, write down the traffic, and give it to Don Imus and our other DJs to read. I mean, my job was so low that elevator operators would ask me to go to the commissary and get them sodas and bring them back and leave them at the elevator. So I did not have an impressive job. But the people I worked with were fantastic.
And Don Imus just passed away.
Yes, he did. I was sorry to hear that. He was a good guy. He treated me nicely. I was his little minion. I also worked for a DJ named Ted Brown, and Ted liked to bet. And off-track betting was popular at the time in New York, and I would go place his bets for him.
Do they still have those OTB locations in New York? I remember those.
As far as I know, they do. And he'd give me 10% of whatever we won.
Oh, well, that was a good deal.
Wow, that sounds like a sitcom.
And then Murray the K came in for a while, and Wolfman Jack. But that was AM radio, so that didn't have too much more of a future. But I worked with these guys. Also working at 30 Rock, that was the time that Saturday Night Live started. And their studio was on the same floor as my office. And I would often run into John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd in the men's room. And I will tell you, if you walked into the men's room and Dan Aykroyd was at one urinal and John Belushi was at the other urinal, you were not going to take the one in the middle. I would turn around and walk out.
That sounds dangerous.
These guys were crazy.
Well, they had that reputation, certainly. And I actually just read, I didn't realize it, but Belushi died at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. I don't know why I just read that, but I just read that the other day, that all these things that happened at this
very unfortunate drug
hotel.
overdose.
Yeah. I knew he died of a drug overdose. So they were crazy, huh? Did you see other cast members as well?
Yes. And I even got to see a couple of the shows. One of my friends controlled the tickets, so every once in a while he'd give me tickets, usually to the rehearsal that they do. I don't think I ever got to see the live show. Neil Sedaka performed once. The Muppets would perform. I mean, that building, 30 Rock, is like Mecca for television.
Oh, for
I ran
sure.
into Bob Hope in the elevator once. Betty Davis came in for an interview. It was just incredible. And I was too young to appreciate it. I look back at it now and I say, oh my goodness, the things I did when I was 19, that was incredible.
And how long before you moved to the television side?
Just a few years. I moved from radio to television. I was a student at Columbia University, and I also worked for Columbia's radio station. While I was working at NBC Radio, there were some opportunities that opened up at WNBC TV, the local NBC television station in New York, and started working there as a news and feature assistant on the 11 o'clock news. And that was sort of my transition into television. I always wanted to work in television. Radio was a stepping stone to television. When I was very young, I believed that television was the most powerful force on earth.
Well, and it may still be. I mean, in with all of its sort of changes, I mean, we've moved to a lot of stuff on the internet, but I mean, it's still a very powerful medium, right?
Still is, supplemented by the internet. When somebody like Donald Trump can have 50 million Instagram followers, Twitter followers, that's amazing power to tweet something out to 50 million people immediately.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, how many people would have been watching, let's say, Walter Cronkite at his heyday?
Those numbers were high because the alternatives to view were much smaller. So they had audiences in the tens of millions because there was nothing else to watch. Now the audience is a little bit less. You may be 8 to 10 million per network.
Interesting.
There's still a lot of people watching, but not as many. It's different. The internet has had an effect.
We're going to take a break, have Mike play some music, and we will come back, and let's pick up right there.
I'm Michelle Joy Nixon, and I was on a game show with Michael Strahan, Terrell Owens, and Gail King. But you know what? Being on the Scott Grant Show on 103.9 is a lot better. I'm excited to talk to you. And never forget, joy is in you.
Hi, this is Scott Grant, and we are back with Tom Giusto and Jennifer Price, and we are recording here in the Standfast Asset Management Studios in beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. Before the break, we were talking about the change in the way that news is delivered in this country, the sort of the growth of the internet. Is that a good thing, bad thing?
It's a good thing because the smartphone enables you to take the news with you anywhere you want on Earth. Television was more limited to being in a place with a TV set. Now you can take that with you everywhere you go, and you have instant access to the news. I remember when we were shooting film, and the deadline was pretty much 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If anything happened after 3, you couldn't get the film developed in time. That's all gone now. It's instantaneous.
Breaking news, instant news. And so many news sources. I know a lot of people in your industry decry that there are so many news sources and so many sort of off-center news sources. Is that a problem, or?
It can be a problem if you don't know the source. You have to investigate the source. When I was a student at Columbia Journalism School, my teacher was Fred Friendly, who was Edward R. Murrow's professor. And this is 50 years ago. He would say there ought to be a course in how to read a newspaper and how to watch a television station to know what's behind what you're seeing. And that stands true even today. You have to know where that news you're reading on Facebook or wherever is coming from.
But I don't think people care that much. I think they care more whether it sort of fits their worldview. And oftentimes whether the headline fits their worldview. I'm not sure anybody's even reading some of those articles because occasionally, not even occasionally, oftentimes somebody will post something and I'll read it and I'll say, well, the article really doesn't match the headline. Mm-hmm. The headline's kind of provocative, right? And then the article itself, there was something posted the other day that said, blame Trump, and you were just in Iowa, but blame Trump and the Republicans for tying up the Iowa phone lines. And then when I read the article, it really didn't say that. It said somebody had tied up the phone lines, but didn't really blame either the Republicans or Trump.
There's a lot of fake news out there, and you have to try to determine what's really fake in the sense that it's false. Among politicians, if they see a story they don't like, they're very likely to call it fake news. It's not fake news. But there are stories that are made up, and people who want to believe they're true will retweet them, put them out on their Facebook pages. I've had friends where I wanted to send them a message after they posted some incredible thing. I said, do you really believe that's true?
Yeah, I get you. I have that thought in my head a lot too, and I don't do it because it tends to just irritate people. So I don't need to go around irritating. They get really defensive. But yeah, one of the questions I always have is, when you posted that, did you believe it? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I've never really gone out there. Because of course, then if they did believe it, and oftentimes they still believe it, even after you say to them, "Well, that's not true. That story is totally fake." They still believe that it's true.
I think millennials will believe anything, especially if it's in print on their phone.
So you have to be careful as a news consumer, as a concerned citizen. You have to be careful about where you're getting your news. I think it's good to stick with mainstream media. I know that's a bad word in some circles, but the mainstream media is really a good source of hopefully fair, accurate, and overall reporting from an objective viewpoint. That's what's important.
Well, and a lot of people don't believe the mainstream media. You're right. I mean,
they're poisoned against it.
Right. And even will argue with you. So let's go to Iowa for a second, because you just came back from Iowa, and I'm excited about that. What was it like? What are the caucuses like?
Well, the people meet in gyms and other public areas, sometimes churches. They get together and they talk about which candidates they are for. They'll group themselves together. They'll count off each other, and they'll see who's viable, who's not viable, and they'll come up with a tally to report to the party leaders. That part collapsed. That was a big embarrassment. But the caucuses, I mean, it's grassroots Americana. Is it the most efficient way of doing something like that? Probably not. I mean, a primary where you actually would just go ahead and vote would probably be better, more efficient. But that's the way it was done in Iowa. It may not survive, given what happened with the reporting.
Yeah, it kind of fell apart this year. I'd like to see it survive. I mean, I believe that some of our traditions are important for our democracy, and we don't like them as much. I mean, I was thinking about Dixville Notch the other day too. It's like, what's that? Does that mean anything anymore that these guys gather shortly after midnight to cast their votes? But it once mattered a lot. It was a big deal in America. It was something that we looked at with a certain amount of pride, right?
The news media presence in both Iowa and New Hampshire was very strong. And one could probably make the argument there was too much media presence for something that was not going to affect the election that much. I mean, Iowa and New Hampshire are maybe indicators of what's to come, but they don't always predict what's to come. And the voting base in those two states does not mirror the voting base in the United States. It's very white.
Well, that's interesting. Well, and Iowa was supposedly in the old days at least somewhat of a cross section of America, right? Wasn't that part of the argument for Iowa starting this process out?
It's the middle of America, but I wouldn't call the population a cross section. No, they're very nice people. They're wonderful people, but you don't get the numbers of blacks, Hispanics, other minorities that you might get in a more diverse state.
How was the turnout of women?
Women was pretty good. It was a little more than half.
Oh, wow.
So that's important. Women is always important. So I think women know that now, and they're getting out to vote. Age is also a factor. You want to get more younger people out. Older people tend to vote, but you have to do a little bit of work to get younger people out and interested in voting. There are ways to make voting easier. You look at things in life and affected by technology, and mostly we don't do things today the way we did 10 years ago. We still vote today the way we did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That can probably be improved. There are better ways to vote.
That's an interesting thought. Let's take a break. We will listen to some music and come back.
I'm Donna Deegan. It feels like I've been running my whole life, and now I'm running for Congress. This is the Scott Grant Show, and you're listening on 103.9.
Hey, Scott Grant here, and you're back listening to the Scott Grant Show on 103.9 FM, and I'm here with Jennifer Price. Can you say hi?
Hi.
And Tom Giusto of ABC News. Right before or during the break, we were talking about the money that gets spent and how important that is to the local economies. The television advertising, the radio advertising, the newspaper and magazine advertising. I mean, how much money are we talking about?
Millions. And it's very important.
Hundreds of millions, right? Billions. Billions? Are we talking billions of dollars nationwide?
I wouldn't say billions, but I haven't totaled it up. But nationwide, it may be that high. But just in the first two primaries, because you can argue that those primaries really don't mirror the population as a whole. So why attach such importance to them? That's what the party officials decided to do. So with those primaries comes enormous television ad buys, enormous media presence. I mean, from all over the world. There was foreign television in Iowa and New Hampshire, Japanese TV, German TV, all of that. And they're spending money. So these primaries bring a lot of money to the states. Hotels are full. My hotel room in New Hampshire was $350 a night. I'm sure today you can get it for $89.95. So
that's probably true.
There's a lot of money going in. And I think it's also worth mentioning how this happened. I think a lot of it goes back to the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where there were all of those riots and disturbances, and a general feeling that people, the voters, weren't picking the candidates. The party leaders were picking the candidates. That's the way it worked. So as a way to reform it, they decided to have the primaries, get the people involved, and for whatever reasons, they decided the Iowa caucuses would go first, New Hampshire primary would be second, and that would be it. They would have to be first and second. Now you get a little bit of a bunch up for Super Tuesday on March 3rd, but these primaries do represent money.
I'm sure there's a lot of money spent. You were saying something, Jennifer, that when you were making your magazine.
Oh, well, yeah. I lived for, the political ads. It was good income. And you had to offer, the same opportunities for both sides. And so that was always gravy.
So you get paid twice, huh?
Yes.
By both parties. And you didn't care who
won. The
competitors,
I would solicit the competitors. Oh, I just found out so-and-so's advertising with me. Well, did you know that? I've got another full page ready for you. Don't miss out.
That's great. And Bloomberg, you were saying $300 million. I thought I read yesterday that he's already spent $350 million. I mean, there's a lot of money spent on politics.
A lot on television ads, and his TV ads are very slick. He's using quotes from Obama.
Yeah, I saw that. And you know what else I noticed? It appeared to me that they had cleaned up or digitized some of that old Obama footage. It looks cleaner than when I remember seeing it the first time. Did you notice that as well?
I didn't particularly notice that.
Well, watch and tell me if whether I picked that out or not. It looks cleaner. I mean, Obama looks cleaner than when he was. It's an old Obama ad, and it looks cleaner than when I first saw it.
Maybe we were shooting in high definition while Obama was president. It might have just been a good copy.
Oh, that's
but
interesting.
I'll look for that. Yes.
Yeah, no, his ads are slick and a little boring. But slick. But he's spending money.
And that's the way you can win, based on these television ads. You get bombarded with them.
I mean, the numbers have gone up a lot, an awful lot. I mean, even a congressional run now, a successful congressional run is in the millions. There was a time that was, a couple $100,000 these guys would spend. Not all that long ago, right?
Yes. A Senate race would be tens of millions for a job that pays $180,000 a year for 6 years.
But those guys get rich off speaking.
Many of them.
Many of them, that's true, not all of them. Carter is the big exception. Jimmy Carter was president, obviously, but never got rich or terribly rich off of his post-presidency.
Well, look at Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton never made more than $50,000 a year when he was the governor of Arkansas before he became president. He racked up a lot of debt while he was president because of Whitewater. When he left the presidency, they made millions in speeches. During Hillary Clinton's campaign, when she filed certain financial documents, she and her husband were making $10 million a year, much of that from speaking fees. That's an enormous amount of money. And then you ask yourself, why are they being paid so much? Does somebody want something for paying them all that money?
Well, I don't know. Were they, or is it just, I remember going to a conference back early, mid-90s, I guess probably the mid-90s, and George H.W. Bush was there, the speaker, and I was impressed, that they had this speaker, and I wanted to go and see, and everybody else wanted to go play golf, and I convinced everybody that we could miss a little bit of golf at this conference to go see George H.W. Bush. And then later I was asking the sponsors, how much they'd spent, and I think I said something like $50,000, and the guy rolled his eyes and just kind of pointed pointed up in the air. There was a much higher number. So, I mean, and I don't think they were trying to get anything out of George H.W. Bush at that point. Maybe they were.
When you give a large amount of money, you usually want something, even if it's just attention.
Right.
The Clinton Foundation, I'm sure the foreign governments that were donating money to the Clinton Foundation had in the back of their minds that if she becomes president, she'll have my ear, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, that's the way politics works. We have a system that does have a lot of problems.
And money's part of the problem. Citizens United, is that part of the problem?
Everything is. I mean, there's just too much money. People talk about term limits, and you can't have term limits. It's already been ruled unconstitutional. You have to pass a constitutional amendment for term limits. And the people who have to pass that amendment are the ones who benefit from not being term limited. So that's unlikely to happen. So we're sort of stuck in a position where the problem can't be solved because the people who would solve it don't want to solve it. Washington is a swamp. I mean, President Trump is right about that.
Oh, let's come back to that. Ooh. We got a break. We'll come back to the swamp.
Hi, this is Jeremiah Blocker. I'm a Knockety resident who likes to listen to Scott Grant on 103.9 FM WSOS St. Augustine, America's oldest city in the morning.
Hi, Scott Grant here, and we are with Tom Giusto. And before the break, we were talking about the swamp, and you were saying that Trump was right, that Washington is a swamp. Is that right?
It is a swamp. The way it was designed, that's true. And if you had asked me, what have you learned? What's the most important thing you've learned covering Washington for 40 years? It would be, you can't drain the swamp. Washington is institutionalized, the way it works, the lobbyists. It's not going to change. I have watched presidents since Jimmy Carter come into office vowing to change Washington, and Washington will spit them out. It cannot be changed.
That's an interesting thought. Well, there's a couple different campaign kind of themes, and one of them is always, this reformer is going to come in and fix stuff. A new broom, right? The new broom sweeps clean kind of campaign. And over the years, I'm sure you've seen guys, carrying brooms even, right? Particularly like in the lower level congressional kind of elections. They don't ever, you're right, they don't ever really change anything. So Trump, has Trump done anything to drain the swamp?
Not really, no. It's hard to change because it's so ingrained. All of these Congress people are holding fundraisers to get money, and you've got to look at who's giving you the money. So Trump talks about draining the swamp. It's easy to talk about draining the swamp, but I haven't really seen what he's done. It's just difficult, the way the situation is in place, the way things are done. And now it's almost impossible to do anything because you have a president of one party and a Congress that's split between two parties. So going back to the Obama years, we really have had almost a stalemate in Congress, the inability to do anything. The congressional leaders of opposing parties won't even talk to one another, and then they won't talk to the president. So what gets done?
Nothing.
In Obama's case, when he first took office and he controlled the presidency and the Congress, he wanted to get Obamacare done. That proved to be very hard. They ended up doing that by squeezing out one vote on Christmas Eve, as I remember.
That's exactly right. That's exactly the way I remember it too. It was hard. We were talking during the break too that one of the things I do is, or not one of the things, my primary thing that I do is I'm a portfolio manager. I invest people's money. I invest people's money in the stock market. I often say that from my perspective as a portfolio manager, that gridlock is good. We like gridlock. We like the idea that nothing's going to change. And you're right. I mean, we had these brief periods where first the Democrats in the first 2 years of Obama and then the first 2 years of Trump, the Republicans had control of everything. And neither party got a lot done when they had control, and then they immediately lost control of at least one Congress or the Senate, and gridlock set in, and I like gridlock. As an investment guy, I like gridlock.
Maybe the economy is doing well under Trump. There's no doubt about that. If you have stocks, you're fine. If you have a retirement portfolio, it's high, so that's good. Now, I think we also have a tremendous budget deficit and national debt that is not sustainable. Everybody agrees it's not sustainable, but no one can solve it. And what we are doing now is just talking about trying to reduce the increase in the budget deficit and the national debt. Not to reduce it at all, just reduce the increase. So we've got years ahead of us of spending more money than we take in. And it's impossible to change. You can't have a balanced budget.
I don't believe so either. I don't think you can have a balanced budget. I think efforts to balance the budget will reduce GDP, which will reduce tax revenue. I mean, it becomes a vicious cycle on the other side. I think you just try and keep that budget deficit at around 19% of GDP, and just keep growing. Just keep growing the tax revenue, keep growing the economy, bring in more income. But that's sort of I'm a little different on the federal budget deficit side. I'm not a huge. It does not terrify me. It never has. I think budget deficits are good. They typically spur the economy, particularly if you spend the money on roads and weapons.
But how long can it go on?
That's a great question. Maybe for forever. I don't know. I mean, it's gone on a long time. How long have we been doing this? We haven't had a budget. We haven't had a balanced budget since Andrew Jackson. The economy collapses during Jackson and immediately post Jackson.
That's a long time ago.
It is a long. It's the only time in the history of the United States that the United States did not owe money was during the Andrew Jackson administration. It's a long time. It was 1824.
Wow.
Right? I think that's right. 1824, 1828, or is it 1820, 1824? Yeah.
I didn't cover politics.
Everybody's neither. None of us did.
But look at Bernie Sanders, the things he wants to do, and some of them are very popular. Wipe out student debt, Medicare for all. Okay, but that's expensive.
Very.
Where are you going to get that money? Whose taxes are you going to raise, or whose programs are you going to cut to make up for that? Or are you just going to borrow more money?
I don't think there's any way we're going to write off student debt altogether. I mean, I think it's just a huge number. Medicare for all, I believe that we will have universal national health care at some point in this country, whether it's 4 years from now or 20 years from now. I mean, I don't think it's that far away.
Sounds like frightening care.
Frightening?
Or lack thereof.
It could be, but you'll probably be able to pay for better coverage.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically the way it works in other industrialized countries. Like England, you pay, if you're rich, you still get better health care, but everybody gets something.
It pays to be rich.
It does pay to be rich. And what does that mean?
You need to invest.
That's right.
In great American companies.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back.
Hi, this is Craig Smith from the Alhambra Theater. You're listening to my good friend Scott Grant on 103.9 WSOS.
Hey, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to The Scott Grant Show, recorded in beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. I'm here with Jennifer Price.
I'm keeping it working.
And Tom Giusto of ABC News. And during the break, we were talking about Trump and the media. So let's talk about that. How Trump has had some tempestuous relationship with the media so far. Is that fair?
He has a love-hate relationship with the media. He's happy to talk about how he hates us, but he knows he needs us. So he'll lash out against the media and then do an interview with someone the next day. He is probably the most accessible president to the media that we've seen in a long time. He can't stop talking. He talks almost every time he leaves the White House to get on the helicopter, talks when he comes back. He'll talk during events. We'll go in for a photo op in the Oval Office. It's usually like 2 or 3 minutes. He'll talk for a half an hour, sometimes an hour. So while he professes to hate the media, he knows he needs the media. He's always used the media. He's always been good at using the media to advance himself. And that's what he still does. Now, there have been some unfortunate instances with suspending credentials of a White House reporter, with going after an NPR reporter at the State Department over some comments and kicking one of their reporters off a Secretary of State's trip. I don't approve of these. I don't think the White House should even be in charge of issuing White House credentials. I think press credentials should be issued by a committee of correspondence. That's the way it's done at the Capitol. And for 40 years, I pretty much had passes to walk into the Congress, the White House, the Pentagon. So I've been involved in this. And they're really just building passes to get you in the front door. But they enable you to work. So if you take someone's White House pass away, you're affecting their ability to make a living. That's why I think the White House has got to be very careful about trying to do that. It's not their role to decide who covers them. We can't get into that situation. People who are being covered by the news media cannot pick the people who cover them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes
Good
perfect
point.
sense. Yeah. And, you see a lot of people complaining that, Trump has a war with the media. Is that a fair assessment, or because now you're telling me that he uses them as well and needs them? So,
yeah. Well, we always use each other. Are we used by politicians and news sources? Yes. Do we use them? Yes. He is very quick to criticize the media, even mock and make fun of the media, including people's medical conditions,
right,
or height. Mini Mike Bloomberg, little George Stephanopoulos. Why is that necessary, really?
Entertainment.
But that's what he does, and but he also does interviews. He keeps doing interviews. He keeps talking, and he answers questions.
Well, he likes to talk, and you were saying
Yes.
that. I mean, he does like to talk. He'll talk and talk and talk. I mean, you see this all the time. I mean, he'll tweet constantly.
He's a salesman. He'll tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. In fact, when I cover him, one of the things I do working for ABC is go to West Palm Beach when he's in Mar-a-Lago. And first thing I do when I know I'm going down there is turn on the notifications on my Twitter account. So I'll be notified whenever he tweets. And you'd be surprised, 10 p.m. on a Sunday night, 6 o'clock in the morning, he tweets. And it gets him an audience of 50 million people.
He's got a big audience. And he's, no matter what he says, we all react. So is that part of the plan, do you think? Or, constantly this question, is he just tweeting for attention, or is it part of the plan?
I think he believes what he tweets. He uses it as a tool to get to the voters. But he still uses the news media. He knows the importance of the media, too. So he does really whoop up crowds against the media. It's the point now where the television networks actually hire private security guards when we cover MAGA rallies, because you never know how he's going to turn the crowd against the news media, and it could be a safety issue. So
That's
we've
powerful.
never had that before, but yes, we hire security guards for us,
Right, yeah, I
protect
got
our
that.
people,
So you're going in with security
Yes.
to keep the crowd, if
just to
the
make sure
crowd,
there's not an incident if the crowd
and have
gets
there
out
been
of hand.
have there been any incidents?
There have been some minor incidents with yelling at people, shoving. Sometimes when reporters do stand-ups, you'll see protesters will gather behind them and start shouting. It's just, you have to be very careful of that. As a First Amendment person, I understand people's rights to protest, but it's got to be a safe situation, and they should try to give us a break sometime. I mean, what we tell them is, we don't go to your job and start yelling and screaming where you work.
Right, sounds like that Jerry Seinfeld skit.
What a dangerous profession.
But we're talking about this, and it feels new. But you were talking earlier about 1968. In some ways, it's not new. I mean, we've seen this before, right? I mean, we've seen all the protests and the the divisiveness and anger. That's the thing that kind of sticks out for me is the anger. We've seen it before, right?
We've seen the division. Probably the earliest presidential race I can remember is Kennedy-Nixon in 1960. The country was divided then, and that was a close race. The country has been pretty much divided ever since then. Every once in a while it flares up a little bit when Spiro Agnew talks about the great silent majority. The pendulum swings one way or another. Now you have conservative people worried that their country is being taken away from them. They feel maybe having a president like Trump gives more legitimacy to their point of view. Things can get out of control. Guns are a big issue. But there's also the lack of talking among elected leaders. I was covering a trip with Leon Panetta when he was the Secretary of Defense, and I was on his plane, and he's a very nice guy. He'd come out to chat with us, and one of the things I talked to him about was the division in the country at the time. And Panetta was in Congress when Tip O'Neill was the Speaker, and we were talking about, well, what did you do? And Reagan was president. So what did you do with the divisiveness then? He said, well, every week Tip O'Neill would go down the hall and have lunch with Bob Michel, who was the minority leader. And they would talk about what they needed to do. What can we do? What had to be done? And this is how we're going to do it. And I guess half jokingly said to him, well, do you think that Speaker Pelosi Nancy Pelosi talks to Speaker John Boehner? And he just laughed. They don't talk to each other. If you can't talk to one another, you're not going to make any progress.
Well, and we've seen this. I mean, Pelosi and Trump have got some kind of personal vendetta going on practically. Look at the time. Jennifer's giving me the signal. We will come back.
Hi, this is Grace De La Rosa, and welcome to the Scott Grant Show on 103.9 FM WSOS.
Hi, Scott Grant here on the Scott Grant Show, and we are talking to Tom Giusto of ABC News. And during the break, you were talking about being on Air Force One.
Yes, I've ridden on Air Force One once. I've also ridden on Air Force Two with the Vice President probably about 3 times, and what I call Air Force 3, which is the plane either with the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State, probably about 10 times. The best thing about flying on Air Force One is that the pilot is never going to come on the intercom and say, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're number 15 for takeoff.
Right.
Wow.
When it's time to take off, the plane takes off. And it will take the shortest route where you want to go. We're in the back of the plane on Air Force One. There's nobody behind us except the flight attendants cooking the meals. And most of the meals are cooked on board. It's not catered. It's not like when you're on a regular airline. They have carts that have trays with catered food. All the food is prepared on Air Force One, unless it's a short hop, and they'll just go to a sandwich shop and buy sandwiches and just put them out on the seats for everybody. The seating is sort of business class type seating, not as good as flying, let's say, international business class or international first class, but it's comfortable. They don't have individual televisions yet. They're configuring a new Air Force One, and we'll see what they do for us there.
Yeah,
Maybe give us internet access.
Trump was talking about building a better Air Force One. I know that. So is it luxurious or sort of just nice?
It's very nice. I mean, it's luxurious if you're the president. He's got an office. He's got a bedroom. The senior staff gets comfortable chairs. It's much nicer than flying on a regular plane. Not necessarily nicer than flying first class on a top airline, but it's comfortable, and the plane gets where it needs to go quickly.
So you said you were on Air Force One once. So who was president?
George W. Bush.
Okay.
And it was a short flight from Chicago to Andrews.
It's still a decent flight.
My job, we're going to tell a story about Brit Hume. My job at ABC was once being on the assignment desk, and I had to assign reporters on foreign trips. And this is when President Reagan was going to China. That was before the 747 Air Force One. It was a smaller Air Force One. It's actually at the Reagan Library. And the networks take turns each day being the travel pool on Air Force One. So it wasn't our turn to be travel pool the day he left, but because of the time difference, we would be travel pool when he landed. And having worked with Sam Donaldson as a White House reporter, his role was to be on Air Force One if he could. Sam wasn't covering the Strip, Britt Hume was. So I said to the other networks, well, we'll take the travel pool, and we'll go on Air Force One. And I assigned Britt Hume to go on Air Force One. He didn't talk to me for days over that. He was so mad. Because you're so confined on Air Force One. Whereas on the press plane, they filled the lavatories with liquor.
Oh.
There was plenty of great food. You can get up and walk around the plane. You can go up to the cockpit. That lets you fly the plane if you wanted. And he was stuck in the back of Air Force One for a 15-hour trip to China. So Air Force One can get you in trouble. Not everybody wants to be on Air Force One.
So the follow plane is more fun. I've seen this in movies.
I've seen
charter. The press charter is more exciting.
The party plane.
The party plane.
Now, we don't have many press charters anymore because of money. There have been great cutbacks in White House travel. White House travel is very expensive. Someone told me years ago, if the public ever knew how expensive it was for the president to travel, he would never be allowed to leave the White House. That is true. A lot of taxpayer money is involved when the president.
Well, I've seen these numbers recently. The Democrats and the Republicans fighting over who spends more on travel, Trump or Obama. So I've seen that a lot in the press, the quasi press.
And Trump did criticize Obama's travel.
Oh, he did.
Trump is doing his own fair share.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they both are. They say again, Jimmy Carter, he's the cheapest ex-president by a lot. All the rest of them are a lot more expensive.
Oh yeah.
So now we're eating up time. You said, tell me your favorite story from all those years in journalism. What's the story that sticks out?
The stories I like the most are not about politicians. They're not about the kings, the queens, the presidents. They're about everyday, average American people who let us into their homes because they had a story to tell. The ones I liked the most were about never giving up hope and triumph over adversity. I did a story on this couple who dated before World War II, but when the man went off to fight in World War II, he didn't propose to the woman. She thought it was hopeless, sent him a Dear John letter while he was fighting abroad, and they broke up. When he came back home, they both married other people, had happy marriages for 40 years, had children. Both of their spouses died. They eventually got back together and married when he was 100 years old. So you never can give up hope. The other story was on a woman.
That's a good Valentine's story, by the way, don't you think?
Yeah.
They ran it on Valentine's Day. Yes, this is the anniversary of when that story ran. Probably it was close to 20 years ago when I did that. And the other story that affected me the most was a story about women who had lung cancer, women who were not smokers who had lung cancer. And about 10-12% of women who have lung cancer were not smokers. And this woman, Debbie Verhines, I still remember her name, welcomed us into her home and did an interview with us. And she had been diagnosed. And at the time, she appeared fine. And she said during the interview, "Do you want to see my head?" And I said, "Okay, if you want to show it to us." And she reached up and she undid the tape that was holding her wig in place and took it off and revealed her bald head ravaged from the chemotherapy. And she said, "I decided I could have a happy disease or a sad disease, and I was going to have a happy disease." She had great strength. She died Christmas Eve of that year.
Wow.
She wrote me a thank you letter about how wonderful it was for her to talk and get that off her chest. And after I read the letter, I put it in my drawer. Once I found out that she died, I could never look at the letter again.
I can see how much it's choking you up just thinking about it.
So
you got tears in your eyes.
I did some good stories. I can't complain. For a kid from the projects in Brooklyn, it worked out okay.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing we're maybe end with this point. You went to Columbia.
Yes, Columbia undergraduate and graduate.
And I went to Cornell. So
Ivy Leaguers,
both two Ivy Leaguers, both in New York. This is one of the things that always bugs me. There's these things on the internet now that, the best college from every state. And, Cornell's a pretty good university, but Columbia always wins in New York.
Well, Columbia, I think, now has come out number 3 in the Ivy League after Harvard and Yale.
Okay.
But for people thinking about college, the best college for you is not the best college you can get into. It should be the best college for you that will meet your needs.
And I think cost starts to matter these days. There are a lot of colleges out there, and there's a lot of pretty expensive colleges out there, and you start looking at, is it worth $100,000, $150,000 in debt to go to some of these schools, and you got to ask yourself, is that worthwhile? I mean, that's sort of my thought. Columbia, I think, is worthwhile. Cornell, Cornell's probably worthwhile.
And you have to be careful about not taking out too much in student loans. You're going to have to pay that off, unless Bernie Sanders is elected.
Which may or may not happen. Who do you think is going to win? The
I
Democrat
would not
first.
venture a guess. I think there's a pretty decent chance that Trump will be reelected. In terms of the Democrats, it's wide open, and it's unusual for it to be after the New Hampshire primary and still have no clear front.
I think it's going to end up being Bloomberg on their side.
He could come in, but then you'd have a race between 2 New York billionaires, and I don't know that the rest of the voters are going to be happy about that. I mean, I don't think Sanders will get the nomination. Buttigieg and Klobuchar both have issues that they would have to contend with to be elected. Biden, who I know and have traveled with on Air Force Two, I covered his trip to the Ukraine. He's not campaigning well. He's having a difficult time.
Yeah, I think so too.
I have no idea
but
who it's going to be.
You think Trump's going to win? Yeah, I do too.
I wouldn't say he's going to win. I think there's a pretty decent chance he will win.
All right. Hey, we got to cut this now. Can you come back again?
Sure, anytime. I'm retired now, mostly.
Loved having you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.